Hey there, this is Nick and Remy with Mirlo Real Estate Partners. This is the Dentelligentsia Podcast, where we help dentists answer the hard questions. We interview people like today. We have Steven Trutter from Ideal Practices, and our goal really is to pick his brain and get some great actionable items that people can use and just do better what they do. So welcome, Steven. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Remy. Thanks for great being here, and super excited to share some knowledge for the very intelligent dental community that's out there and give them some guidance for those that are looking to step into practice ownership.
Yeah, 100%. We're super excited about this because a lot of our clients are startups. And so why don't you tell us a little bit more about Ideal Practices and why you do what you do?
Why I do what we do? Well, number one, everything is entrepreneurship. So I love being an entrepreneur myself. I have been a part of almost the last count, about 900 startup dental practices in my career. And I get to be a part of an awesome team and have an awesome team here at Ideal Practices that guides associate dentists to becoming proud, confident practice owners. So we are a group of very seasoned and experienced consultants, buying experience, over 600 years of experience of people that have been doing startups for years. And so we guide clients through our entire process. We have a 13-stage process where we go through and we guide them through the entire process so that when they open up their doors, they're more confident, they're ready to lead their team, and they hit the ground running so that they have hundreds of patients that they love from day one. So that's the goal.
Awesome. So we do startups as well. Certainly, we haven't hit that number. Hopefully, someday in the future we'll get there. But from your perspective, share some success stories. Tell us, how when an associate dentist hires Ideal Practices, how do you guys make a difference?
I think great question, Nick. I think the biggest thing is, I think there's a lot of people out there. There is approach of like, hey, could you DIY your own practice? Sure, you could. And, some people kind of trudge through it and they find maybe some varying degrees of success. I think what we bring to the table for associate dentists is a faster path of becoming successful without the typical hurdles and the typical roadblocks that most people have when they experience going through a startup. If you've ever done anything ever, or maybe even done it once, you don't know exactly what to look for, what those pitfalls can be. So we help identify what those pitfalls are. We help identify the solutions and to be able to get them on a path of success. And we've created huge success stories. And the difference is, I think the varying degrees of success also are based upon the person. For some, it's like, I've had clients who are like, I want $1 million practice in 12 months. Cool, I have that formula. We'll get you there. In some areas of the country, it could hurt getting there in 12 months, but I got the formula. For some, they go, I don't want that kind of practice. For some, and this may resonate with a lot of the people that are listening, is I want a practice where I could come in every day. I have my own team. I have my own system. I have the patients that I love. And I don't have a corporate dental approach where here's the spreadsheet and we need to produce more, where they can sit down with their patients and deliver what they want to have and to be able to treat the patients the way that they want. And I think that's the biggest thing. I've got tons of financially successful practices. I think the biggest thing is that how quickly can we help them become profitable so that they are no longer working for somebody else? Right? Because that's the point. It's like, if you're an associate dentist, you're wanting to become a practice owner because you don't want to work for somebody else. And on average, our average practice owners achieve success or get out of their associate position on average somewhere between 4 and 6 months. So they're able that their own practice is sustainable enough so that they no longer have to work as an associate. And we actually celebrate that. We call it their Freedom Day. So we actually call it a day. It's like a milestone that we do where we talk about that. So on average, 4 to 6 months, they're no longer working for somebody else.
That's huge.
Yep.
That's incredible. Absolutely. It can be years in some cases, that transition before you're able to achieve that. So 4 to 6 months, that's exciting. And I'm sure anybody listening, any doctor would be excited about the prospect of.
And Remy, we all hear those stories, and even associate dentists, like they know, like if you're an associate dentist listening today, you know that friend, you know that doctor on the corner, that struggled for 2 or 3 years to make their practice profitable. We see it on Facebook. I see posts on Facebook all the time about I'm struggling with a practice, whether it's a startup or maybe in a practice they acquired. And I just like to tell people, like, there's a better method to get there. Whether you're I was actually just reading an article about Tom Brady. Okay, so Tom Brady, everyone knows, unless you've been in a cave for the last 75 years of your life, everybody knows who Tom Brady is. Well, Tom Brady now is what? He's an announcer for Fox Sports. So he's doing the football games. And I was reading this article where they kind of critiqued his first football game. And he said, well, like the first half he was kind of clunky, but in the second half he was better. But they talked about all the preparation and all the coaching he was doing, because he said, as a football player, I had nutritionists, I had coaches, I had coordinators. And he goes, I'm taking the same approach, basically, is what he's saying, to becoming a great announcer. Why wouldn't, as you're an associate, like if you could have a cheat code to becoming a practice owner faster, better, and not have to trudge through it? I don't understand. I've railed myself on my own podcast and on forums before. I don't understand this rite of passage that so many dentists go through. He's like, I will feel better if I struggle for 2 or 3 years, and then one day I can say I have a profitable practice. What if you can have a profitable practice in 2 or 3 months versus 2 or 3 years?
Yeah.
Would you do it? Cool. I would.
Yeah, no, we come across this, I think, quite a bit. I mean, like in our business, a lot of times we'll find somebody after they've really tried that DIY approach and been doing it for 6-9 months and have struck out, or actually used a commercial real estate agent who maybe wasn't one that understood dental, or maybe they, God forbid, they used a residential real estate agent and who didn't understand commercial, which, we run into those types of, it's scary, but we run into those types of stories all the time.
Especially in your space, especially in the real estate space. And we guide clients through the real estate process. I mean, when we partner with you guys, like we're not agents, but we know the transactional part. So I see a lot of those hiccups where they think, if I do this by myself, like one of the big common misconceptions of commercial real estate would be, if I do it by myself, I'll get a better deal. No, you'll get a crappy deal. You'll get the worst deal ever because you're not experienced. I like to call it the tale of two deals. It's like dentist comes in by themselves. Here's that lease. You're represented. Wait a minute. Well, here's a different lease. Totally different terms. That probably could happen just because they're not. If you haven't done hundreds of transactions of real estate, you're going to be taken advantage of.
Steven, I cited your tale of two deals in a podcast we did last week. And your podcast covering the real estate component in these projects is, demonstrating you understand our world. Most people don't. And we had fun listening to it. So you don't end up being a part of 900 startups by accident. So talk to us about how you got into this space, and then how you got to what it is today.
I had I guess we all kind of go through every once in a while. Like, I met a girl. Okay, so I met a girl who became my wife, and her father was a sales rep for a very prominent, large distributor in the country. And at the time, I was first job out of college. I was working in Chicago, and he's like, hey, you should look in the dental industry. I was like, oh, the dental industry? What the heck? Now, truth be told, if anybody's ever read my book, I do disclose that I do have a degree in biology. True story. I do have a 4-year degree. Took 4.5 years, but I do have a degree in biology. I don't know the first thing about clinical dentistry. I don't know the numbers of teeth other than number 15, because I have a crown on number 15 in my own mouth. I don't know dentistry or anything. But I got into the dental space through kind of a, introductory channel through my now father-in-law. It was just simply an introduction, and I was in the finance space. So I worked for one of the largest, probably the largest dental specific lender in the country. And I was there for, almost a decade. And that's where I got my start. Now, my first job out of college, funny story, was it was a startup. My first job out of college was with a startup, and I helped start up branches. And then I went into the lending space, and I was lending to startups. And then I met a friend was a partner within Ideal Practices. And we had this thing. We said, we have a dream, like this could be Ideal Practices. So then I went in that space, and then I'm here. So startups have always kind of been a part of like my DNA. I think from the time I left college, and just so happens, those have been in the dental space, especially on this vendor side outside of the dentist space. It's one of those industries that we find like once we're in, it's like really hard to leave. You get into it, there's a lot of networks, there's a lot of great people like you guys and people that are like, I think that are very good people that focus on the dental industry, that do great things for dentists and love what I do. And, after lots of them, it's just, you learn over time, almost 900 of them. And they're all different. They're all different and unique to be a part of what their journey is. And I get emails on a weekly basis from clients that have opened up their doors, and they don't talk about even the financial success. They even talk about different stories about those things. Like, I never thought I got an email. This actually was a messenger about 6 or 8 months ago, and it was one of our clients, and he thanked us for where he's at. And he's actually still part of one of our accelerated growth programs. And his best line was, he said, "I paid off my student loans today." And he said, of all the goals I never thought I'd be able to get to was paying off my student loans. And that's cool. I love to be able to have that kind of story, to be able to change a life, not only for his professional, but even his personal life, to be able to accomplish something like that.
That's the real Freedom Day. That sounds like that's the real freedom.
That was a real great Freedom Day. I never thought about that. Yeah, Remy, it's like, so he had it wasn't working for somebody else, and he has his student loans paid off. So that is real freedom, 100%.
Well, especially when you consider how much debt these associates carry. I mean, it's pretty big.
Yeah.
Pretty big.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I've talked about it, like the fastest way out of debt, student loan debt, become a practice owner. Great.
Talk to us about the roadmap that you guys use, or maybe, what I was really impressed by is, and you don't need to, take us through the visioning, just, how it seems like a really cool and important way to kind of get them to kind of create a strong foundation to, get to exactly where they want to be. Talk to us more about that.
Yeah, I can talk about a little bit about the process in which we go through, for sure. One of the first things that we do with every client is we do have a vision call. And I was talking about that the other day, and that is about I think most people, when they think about vision, I think most doctors and most people kind of go into, okay, what do you want the space to look like, and how many operatories, how many treatment rooms you want to have, and how big of a space? Yep, because most dentists, the first thing that they do when they say, I'm going to go open a practice, is they need space and they need money. But most of them go there first. I'll just say this, like, you don't need me or my team to find space and put in some chairs, and you don't need to do that. I think it goes into how to create who they are, who they're going to be within their community. And I like to go through that process with our clients to understand, like, if we're going to tell a story, who are you going to be within the community? How do we attract your kinds of patients even before your doors open? How do we attract the right team members within your practice? Even talking about kind of some long range elements of, like, how do you want people to remember you, even maybe beyond dentistry? And then the other part is I talk about how they want to help support something in their community. So one of the methods I talk about this 3P methodology. I call it practice, profits, and purpose. And that really kind of frames our entire process, which is the practice part is kind of like the physical elements, where we need to identify the right demographics. We need to find the right space. We need to have the right floor plan. We need to have all the right negotiations for all the equipment, construction, technologies, like the physical elements. The profits part, if you can imagine this as like 3 steps, the profits part is about having the right systems. Now, I'm not saying, like, how do you become the most profitable dental practice, but if you're not getting profits, then this is a fun hobby, and it's a very expensive fun hobby. So profits, I'm talking about systems. I'm talking about the elements of hiring the right people, understanding, navigating insurances. We're talking about the elements of your ground marketing, your internal marketing, having, what are your protocols, your systems, financial guidelines, like all the systems of actually having a business. That's the profits. And we train our clients to have all those elements. And then the other thing we train about is this purpose. Like, what are you doing this for? And nearly every one of our clients has something that they give back to, something that ties their practice to their community, that they can walk around and say, hey, I'm able to support something locally in my community. And that really gets a lot of dentists really, for lack of a better term, jazzed up. I can't think of another term other than, like, it gets them they get them really, it gets them really very energized because they're able to, I always find most dentists, 99% of the ones I've ever encountered are like, they're caregivers. Like, it's called dental care. And when I start talking about this give, like, hey, what do you want to support within your community? They all go, wow, yeah, I want to do that. And that makes the big difference between, like, nothing against corporate dentistry. Like, I don't do starts for corporate dentists or DSOs or anything. But the big difference between private practice and the corporate dentistry is the people and how you connect within your community. So if we can tell a better story about how you connect in your community, the give and what they give back to. And it could be all kinds of things. It could be personal elements. It could be personal interests, things that could be fun that just shows the community, like, that Dr. Nick or Dr. Remy or Dr. Steven, like, we're not just the dentist in the white coat, but it's like, wow, that's a person within a community. That makes a huge difference between maybe you and your practice and the patients choosing the corporate dentistry down the corner.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to hear this, the way that you say it. I mean, we normally, our projects, although somewhat similar, we're limited typically to, we do want to help introduce different players, contractors and whatnot. But at its core, it's really about communication, helping to educate our clients and so that they can, get from point A to point B at the easiest, most seamless way possible. One of the ways that we want to, market knowledge is huge. And so we don't just take them and, maybe there is one space or one location that's just like dynamite beyond compare some other ones, but we have to know the market. We can't really judge that one without really, getting involved and seeing what the market will bear. And that's one of the strategies that we use to kind of help. We might have a favorite, but if this guy's going to offer way more TI, maybe we try to use that to get more TI or tenant improvement dollars for the space we want. There's all these different mechanisms, but it's really scary. We're dealing with people that have a lot of student debt, and their biggest decision of their professional career to start up a dental practice. It's really expensive. Talk to us about how expensive it is.
$750,000 or more, depending on real estate. I mean, that's just the world that we live in right now. When I started, it was like, hey, for $300,000 or $400,000, you can open up a practice. That number is more than double in some environments. And are there people that I see like, hey, I built my first practice for $200,000? Sure, you're the one out of like, more than 1,000 that's done that, but that's not the norm. Like, if you're going into a space that's a couple thousand square feet, depending on where you're at, it could be $150 to $200 or more per square foot just in construction, plus all the technology, plus the marketing, plus working operating capital, plus your equipment. Yeah, so it is $600,000, $700,000, $100,000 or more. That's excluding commercial real estate if they were going to purchase real estate. So in the real estate is the biggest outside of construction equipment. It's like, it will be the most important document that they will ever sign in their professional lives is a lease. If they go into a lease space, we can talk purchase and things like that. But a lease is the most important document, because what most people don't understand when it comes to a lease or real estate is what happens if you need to sell your practice. Is that transferable? Like all these different things, so that, your lease that you sign, if you're signing a lease, it's not just about like, hey, what's my price per square foot and what's my TI allowance? It's also about, okay, if I need to sell, what happens? If I need to get out of this, what happens? Can I sell? Like, there was a post on a Facebook group, I can't remember which group it was in, and the doctor was talking about like, hey, I'm going to buy this practice, but is the lease transferable from the seller to me, or how does that whole thing work? Is that part of the transaction? It's like, that should have been pre-negotiated before, like those details. What they don't understand is what they're signing today is about not today. It's also about what needs to happen in the next decade or more from today if something does happen. And so having that foresight from a real estate perspective to really understand that.
How do you, when you're dealing with somebody who, is making such a substantial and emotional decision, how do you help empower them to make that decision? I mean, before you go, it seems like, I'm not polling people, but the more people that we talk to that are young dentists, their preference would be to buy a practice. And it's self-serving for someone like me to say, well, look at this, how we do things. But really, the right way to make any major decision is it should be an informed decision, right? I mean, how do you make a decision without fully, investigating it?
I think when it comes to practice ownership, this is the one thing that I make very clear is I will never sell anybody on the idea of doing a startup because it takes a huge, deep personal and professional commitment to get it right. I say to anybody listening, explore transitions, explore an acquisition. I just had a great gentleman. His name is Brian Hanks. If anyone doesn't know Brian Hanks, I'll give him a little bit of plug. He's probably one of the greatest transition specialists out there that guides people as a buyer's representative to buy practices. I literally had him on my podcast to talk about hey, listen, I'm talking about practice ownership. So I think everyone should explore acquisitions and see explore acquisition and startup. If you're wanting to become a practice owner, see which one's the right fit, see what things are available. And a lot of times in today's environment, what's going to come down to is calendar. How quickly can you find a practice to buy? And how much time do you want to give to that process before? And this is what happens with so many. I share this because these are the stories of our clients. The majority of our clients have done this. I've been looking for a year or 2 or 3. Can't find the practice I want. I'm now ready to start my own practice. So at some point, I think what has to be done is you have to put a line on the calendar and say, when do I make a switch? And I think for those that are listening saying, hey, I think I want to go buy a practice. When do you want to own? Don't think about it as when do I want to start? It's when do I want to own? Because a startup takes about 18 months in today's environment, 12 to 18 months. And I'm going to err on the side of 18-ish months from the time I have the idea to open your doors, depend on lots of factors, one of them being real estate and availability and things like that. But let's call it 18-ish months. For an acquisition, it could be that or longer. So it's not about, hey, when do I want to start looking for a practice? Hey, when do I want to own? And you need to back that up because it may take 12 to 18 months to find a practice, negotiate it, and do all those things. So I think it just takes a huge, deep commitment to go through that to really come to that conclusion of what is the right path.
I think setting a line in the sand, if you will, putting a date on the calendar, that's good advice because we see the same thing. We often have people coming to us after attempting DIY real estate in this case, or they've been looking for a practice to purchase for 6 months, 12 months or more.
2 years.
Yeah.
2 years.
And they're still reluctant to pursue starting up. And the same advice you gave, you don't know what you don't know, and you should be looking at all options on the table, right? Both
absolutely. I think they need to chase opportunities as opposed to especially in the real estate. And I've ran into, we have helped guide clients, and sometimes when they start to chase the real estate, they don't chase the opportunity for their practice. And do you need real estate? Yes. Without a home, you can't have a practice. But I think one of the common pitfalls of sometimes of associate dentists is they're chasing real estate or they're chasing ownership. If I think about a couple of my biggest things you should never do with real estate is chasing ownership of real estate for the sake of ownership. Because what that does is it places the real estate, the physical space over the opportunity for the practice. And then I find those are the doctors that take the longest or never get to the finish line because they're looking for the real estate as opposed to, I know the market where I need to be. Now, obviously, we can't make real estate appear, and commercial real estate needs to be available. But I find if you're chasing real estate and you're listening to man, I've been looking for real estate, stop, quit looking for space, find an opportunity. What I mean by that is find the right demographics with the area that has the right competition, with the right patient base. Then find real estate in that defined zone. It's kind of like kids sometimes. I have 3 daughters, so now they're older, but every once in a while kids be like, I'm bored because they're thinking about all the possibilities and they can't think of a possibility. But I remember our old house when I used to live in Pennsylvania, and we had it was kind of fenced in, and it had this nice big jungle gym thing. It was made by the Amish people. I mean, this thing was indestructible, bulletproof. But if I put my daughters outside and said, you can do anything you want to do on that thing, hours. because they had the hour. It would be like, cool, we can think of all kinds of things. We can make a fort underneath the thing. We got the climbing wall thing. We got like the swings slide. They can do everything. And I think that's kind of like with real estate. If there's not a defined zone or defined parameters, and they say anywhere in Michigan, like with where you guys, you'll never find. They think it's like if I say, hey, I can be anywhere from, an hour, 2 hours away, you won't find real estate just because you think it's a broader area that you just have more options. You don't have greater opportunities. So I think it needs to be very defined, to help make decisions in a timely fashion.
How do you help them use the demographics to get to that place?
It's the demographics. I think most people, when they think about demographics, they think about just like numbers on paper. And so most people don't understand what really demographics is about. It's about people. And it's finding the right people that you want to serve. So does it have information about competition ratios and things like that? Absolutely. We've put clients in areas that aren't void of dentists all the time. And that's the other thing I would get on a soapbox about, and I'll do it for a moment, which is everyone thinks like, if I need to be successful as a startup, I need to go to a rural location because some person on Facebook says that's what the best thing to do. Okay, cool. Do you want to serve a rural population? What are their dental needs? If you don't want to live in a rural area and you don't want to serve rural patients, don't open a practice in the middle of nowhere just because somebody said that's a great opportunity. Demographics is about, I like to say, finding an area of the abundance of the kinds of patients you want to serve. That's what demographics is about. It's like what kind of patients you love to serve, but also understanding what is that competition. And different markets are going to have competition. I think pretty towns, and you can name a lot of different ones that a lot of people flock to, there's going to be greater competition. Now, greater competition doesn't mean you're going to fail. Greater competition means your growth pattern might be a little bit slower, and you're going to spend more to buy a patient, i.e. marketing. You're going to spend more in marketing to attract patients, and that's what it is. So the demographics also helps give a parameter to real estate professionals like yourselves to say, okay, now that you're an associate, you've got this defined zone. You can go to Remy, you can go to Nick and say, hey, we have found this area. This is where we need to go. Now the curveball is demographics doesn't identify real estate. Most people think like, hey, so I got this report and it had this circle. I'm going to go into the circle. But the circle is about the people. But you need to understand, like, where do we need to attract the people? So in some cases, we may say, hey, go to Nick, go to Remy and say, hey, this is the great area, but like the people drive this way. Or we need to go one town over. Or if you go 3 exits north, you're going to find more property. And that's how the people kind of travel within an area. So if you just look at a demographics report, most people say, got a ring, 2 or 3 mile ring or whatever it is, I'm going to go there. Well, no. That's just telling you where the people are. That doesn't necessarily correspond to real estate. So then we have to talk with real estate professionals like you guys and say, this is where they're at. We're around these areas. Do we go in the middle? Possibly. Or do we go just a little bit outside of those zones to find the right property, which may mean you may be closer to competition, but it's in the right spot to attract patients. It's kind of like suburban areas. It's like, how do people travel in and out of a city? Like if you go too far in or out, you may be like, hey, I'm here and there's no dentists. There's no patients. Great. Congratulations. You found a space with no dentists, no competition, but there's no patients there because either are the wrong demographic, they're the wrong age, they don't have the right dental needs, or they don't travel there. They don't go from that area. They exit that area.
This comes back to me, I keep hearing you say opportunity, and that's what it is. And it's not definable in any one way or another. Opportunity is going to mean something different to you, Steven, than it's going to mean to Nick. And so, I think matching up an opportunity and understanding it with individuals' needs is the key. And if it doesn't match up, then you go and find something else, and that does work. So.
Yeah, and that's what demographics is about: is finding the area of people or the abundance of people that you want to serve, and then strategically placing the practice to attract them to your location.
So what are some key elements of a strong patient acquisition strategy that a new dentist should employ?
When it comes to marketing, I would say be prepared to invest in marketing. I see too many doctors, again, because I'm on a lot of different social platforms, the thing that really bothers me is when I see posts that say something like, hey, everybody, I'm getting ready to open my doors in a month. What is everybody doing for marketing? I've seen literally almost verbatim posts like that 5 months ago. You should have been thinking about that, because marketing takes months. What I mean by that, if you're a startup, you're not marketing 6 months prior to your practice. You may be chumming the waters a little bit and you're building up to opening, because you're not going to be actively marketing because you can't schedule patients 6 months in advance. When I talk about marketing, I talk about like kind of in different, there needs to be different parts. Do you need to have all the kind of like agency components? Sure. Like you need to have somebody that can handle your set up a very responsive website. If you're going to do any type of like maybe Google ads, if you're going to have, you need to have a social media platform. I think the other part is like, if you're in a community, you need to make a very focused effort on community connections with other small business owners. And that's not going to the local companies and saying, hey, do you have patients to send me? It's being a business owner, making personal connections with other business owners to say, hey, how can I help support your business? You're a local business. I'm a local business. How can I support you? If you go into it trying to get something in return, it's not going to work. So you need to have social media. You need to have, website and all those kind of like, I'll call them agency elements, like a company that does some of those foundational elements. I think the other part is like, if you want to open your doors, one of the things we always say to our clients is your first 100 patients are on you. And they're like, what do you mean? Because Google ads and keywords and all those things take time, because you got to see how people are going to respond within a marketplace. There's algorithms to all this. Listen, I have a whole CMO and a whole team behind me. And when it comes to marketing, I see numbers all the time. And I know it's not like, hey, hit that switch, that button will work. It takes time. If you're a startup, you are responsible for bringing in, I always say, your first 100 patients. We kind of refer to it as like a VIP list, like family, friends, friends of friends, cousins, aunts, uncles, like anybody going into the community saying, I'm making a connection committee to get the first X amount of patients are on you. The other elements will give traction. Maybe there's local events. We've had a number of clients recognized on local TV, not ads, but like telling about their give. Like one of our clients, his name's Dr. Andrew. He's actually my own dentist. He's like 8 minutes that way from my house. He was recognized on one of the local like TV networks here in Florida, in Tampa, where I'm located. And they weren't talking about like Dr. Andrew's skills. They weren't talking about like, he's a great dentist. They weren't even talking about dentistry. They were talking about the dentist that is supporting one of the largest animal shelters in Tampa, how he and his wife had a couple rescue dogs. And I see Dr. Andrew, like he's done black tie events with this organization. And the whole TV segment, it was like a news segment, was talking about the dentist and the support for a local non-for-profit organization in the greater Tampa area. That was done a month before he opened his doors. So think about what his doors looked like when they opened. Like the exposure is already there. He had probably one of the largest startups I've ever seen. He did almost $2 million in 12 months. Like in production, like one of the in a competitive, suburban, non-rural, like he's suburban. Like I'm as suburban as I possibly can be. And he just had a focus on marketing, which was, how do I have events that are local? How do I make connections with local businesses? How do I help drive patients? How do I have a social media presence that is consistent to be able to just make connections? And the other part about this is, I would say, reviews. Now, reviews take time, obviously, to get patients. But if any of us have ever bought anything ever, like if you go on Amazon, you're going to buy a product, what do we naturally typically do? You look at the reviews. In the reviews, usually there's always like, oh, wow, this is like 4.8 stars. And the 1 star is usually, the product was great, but the box was crushed. Helpful. But we all get those kind of reviews all the time. It's like the box. My wife was buying something the other day. So I look at reviews. Buying a new TV, you look at the reviews. You buy cars sometimes, probably look at reviews. You buy anything, you look at reviews. So I think reviews are a big part of it, which is have a review process that can drive more and more patients into your practice, because people that make decisions for households, typically like a lot of times moms, wives, and people like that, they're looking at the reviews of those providers. There has to be a system of how you're going to get 5-star reviews. Someone had posted on a Facebook group earlier today about like the most reviews, and Dr. Andrew, I'll brag on him for one more moment, has 1,700 5-star reviews in 2 years.
So online presence and reputation management is huge for a startup, is what you're saying.
Yes, and knowing that you will have to get really uncomfortable, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You will need to go out. You will need to, lack of a better term is, you'll need to shake hands and kiss babies. That is your job as a dentist. You need to go out. If you're open 2 or 3 days a week and that third day you don't have any patients, what are you doing? You're not sitting there. You're finding new patients. You're making connections in the community. Every downtime needs to be focused on patient growth, period, as a startup. And it starts with you. You can have other components. All those other components help support those elements, whether it's your website, Google Ads, and all those things. But if you think an agency, and I know some really great marketing agencies, if you think an agency is a solution to marketing for a startup, you will not succeed. And then you'll be that person that's asking for, like, who's everybody using for marketing? And then 3 months later, who's everybody using for marketing? And then finally, an agency will come to you and say, it's not our fault. What else are you doing to drive patients? That's a big part of it, is what are you and your team doing locally to drive ground marketing?
If you don't, ultimately what you're saying is if you don't have a good plan, you're just floundering, right? I mean, like you have to, it has to be planned out. Otherwise you're not gonna get there.
That's right.
So talk to us about, I guess, a young dentist setting ambitious, but also realistic goals. I mean, like you gave us some timelines as far as kind of like, what it could take but somebody who, in Averageville, USA, I mean, like what should they be, let's say, I guess I don't know if maybe I'm making this a little bit too complicated, but you talked about Freedom Day, but there's also a certain level of profitability or making money. And that, that's important. And I think, it's good to at least address it from your perspective.
Yeah, I think, average break-even point for our clients is around 6 months. So they're able to break even on average right then. And I think that's a big part. Keep in mind, like, it also depends on somebody's personal growth, because I think a lot of people look at things like overhead expenses and things like that. Listen, folks, overhead expenses are irrelevant for a startup in the very beginning. Everything is overhead. You have no production. So like people are like, hey, what's the overhead of a startup? Day one, it's 100% because you have no patients. So you have no revenue. So everything is overhead. Everything will normalize over the course of the first couple of years, but it depends on your growth pattern. I've had clients that have wanted to make a faster growth pattern. So therefore they spend a lot more and invest a lot more into marketing to have a faster growth pattern that's there. I think the profits is extremely important, Nick, to your point, and they need to focus on that. But they also need to have a better grasp and hold of the systems inside of their practice, because we've had some really fast growing practices, and there are problems that happen with fast growing practices, which is scalability of the systems that are underneath of them. So when you have a really fast growth, it's like, do we have the proper support of that growth with the right people in the right places within the practice? Can the system support that? Well, everyone would love to have 100 patients scheduled from day one. 100 patients in the first month hurts. We've had a lot of clients have had 100 new patients in their first month, and it's like, yeah, I got there. And then they get to the end, they're like, oh, that was painful, because it's so much at one time. Everything is coming after you fast. And it's like you're a first-time practice owner. It's kind of like, the NFL season just started this past weekend. They talk about the rookie quarterbacks and how fast the game is. That's kind of what like a startup is when you have that many patients, and it's a good problem to have, but things need to slow down a little bit, but more about having systems that can help slow that down while you still have the growth of patients, but you have the systems that can help organize it in a better way.
Steven, in the same vein, do you subscribe to the idea that you're setting metrics or benchmarks based on revenue generating space? So, for example, each op should be able to produce X number of dollars at a certain point, and using that as a, to scale up and aim
Yeah.
for?
Yeah, I think there are some benchmarks that could be in there. I think more of the benchmarks that we focus on are there are obviously revenue benchmarks, but even in my book I talk about like benchmarks that we talk about in our book. It's about how quickly, more looking at it as there are some financial ones that are in there, but a lot of it is new patient growth benchmarks. How do you get to 1,000? Like we have like a 1,200 patient thing. Like how quickly in the first year? How quickly can you have like a five? Like your first couple big production days. The freedom day and those different elements. So I personally don't like get into like the EBITDA and like breaking down like every day on a spreadsheet of what those practices are. There needs to be revenue goals. But I think if you focus continuously on bigger goals, which are patient growth and those things, then all those other things start to fall into line. And I think the other part is monitoring your expenses within a practice as well is a big part of like what's happening. You can some startups get a little bit over their tips a little bit on their skis when they focus on big ticket items they don't have the production for, whether that's milling or some different elements of technology that they find to be sexy technology that they just don't have the production for or the people power to really run it. But don't focus on like how do you build the cheapest startup, because I think there's far other end of the spectrum where dentists focus on like how inexpensive and cheap can I build a startup. All you'll end up with is a very, very cheap startup and a cheap practice, and everybody will know you as the cheap dentist. So there needs to be a balance when it comes to what those elements are. But I think there are milestones that need to exist as a startup. And I think you've got to look at the growth of new patients. Yeah, I think you need to look at your how many like reviews, whether it's Yelp. If you're in some parts of the country, they focus on Yelp. Sometimes they use Google reviews. Like those elements need to be focused on. I think there needs to be obviously some revenue elements that are in there, and then obviously new patients. Those are some of the bigger milestones that aren't necessarily nitty gritty on breaking down what you do on a daily basis, but more as a collective bigger 30,000 foot view in that first year or so is focused on these bigger milestones, because you're learning a craft in the first year.
Well, as real estate agents, we can absolutely relate, because if we don't have new clients, we don't have a business.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Yeah, we got to keep going to the well and making the cold calls and doing the hard things. But it starts to snowball, and you get better at it, and you learn some strategies, and you have systems.
Yep.
Let me talk or ask you a question. Obviously, you said 900 startups you guys have helped. And what's really cool about that, actually, you are part of the visioning call for each and every one of those. Talk to us about the feeling that you get, or what's the most inspirational thing about doing your job? Is it in the process? Is it afterwards? Is it 5 years down the road? What's exciting to you?
What's exciting to me is, and I'm pulling up my phone because I got an email a week ago from one of our clients talking about his experience with our entire team. And I think one of the biggest lines was, he talked about getting to this place. His name is Dr. Arth, and I'll share Dr. Arth's story here. He said he was nervous about the startup process. He says, remember after the vision call thinking myself, this is going to be really hard for me to do, because he said, I'm the type of person that needs to experience something myself before making a decision. So, kind of closed in a little bit. But his dream was to be able to create an environment where patients felt comfortable and had the best experience and have a profitable practice. He said, and the result was he's got it. He says he has patients. He's fallen in love with everything that we've helped him create. He was profitable in his first month, actually, and in fact did better than his long-term full-time profit projections that he said. And he said, most importantly, when I look back on this whole experience, I can say that has changed. He said, my personality for better. He said, I tried to mimic good habits from those around me. And he said, it's made him a better person. He goes, for that, he is forever grateful. And that's what excites me, man. Getting those kinds of emails, getting that kind of response, and more, not even the response to what our team has been able to help Dr. Arthu and other clients like him, but it's more of having that story that somebody got to a different part of their life. Maybe they didn't think. It was like some people have self-imposed ceilings on, like, oh, I won't be able to get there. I won't be able to have that. But when they do get there, that's the best part, because they were able to achieve something that maybe they never thought was possible, or in a timeline they never thought possible. And so for me, that's the most rewarding part of what I get to do, is have a team that is able to create that, and to be able to hear those stories from clients and dentists who've been able to achieve something maybe that have had maybe self-limiting belief in themselves, but they knew they wanted to do a startup, but getting to a place where beyond their dreams is where they're at. And that's what I want for every dentist.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. I mean, it really resonates with me, and I'm sure with Remy also. I was a landlord's agent for a big portion of my career, and I wasn't focused on dentistry. I was just, ultimately what it turned out I was focused on was helping the landlord get the very best terms. And anytime a broker or any tenant came to our door and they were represented by somebody who was good at what they do, that tenant got a better deal. At a certain point in my career, I was like, I only got one life. What am I doing here? If I'm going to be doing this, I want to be living within my values and helping the people that need help. And luckily one thing led to another, and here I am, and here we are. And so it's really cool to see that. It's really cool to be able to kind of, be a part of, something special, and be a part of, because this is, as we've kind of talked, there's all these foundational elements to, and, not to get crazy patriotic, but like, this is the American dream. Our clients are actually living, they're entrepreneurs, they're small business people, and they need strong guidance, and they need somebody who's there who can help, basically take them and help them transact at a high level. And we're super excited to be able to do that. And it was awesome to be able to hear a lot of really valuable things from you. And we have a few more questions we'd like to ask.
Fire away.
You had mentioned Brian Hanks. We had him on here a couple of days, or maybe last week.
Sure.
At some point. He was really cool, and we had actually asked him, hey, what's a question that you would ask the next people? We forgot to write. I was like, oh shit, I gotta. I don't have it, but we had somebody who was a transitions consultant that is on the seller side last, and he had said, hey, talk to us about what trends you're seeing in the dental industry, and what should new practice owners be aware of as they launch their new practices? Like, what's different, or what do you see coming down the pike in the future?
What do I see in the future is, I feel like technology is going to make huge strides internally within practices, especially with the advent of AI and things like that. I think that's going to translate internally within practices. I think from an ownership perspective, I think there is still going to be a growing opportunity that's going to exist for private practice owners. While corporate dentistry and DSOs feel like they're getting bigger by the day, there are some that are starting to have some challenges that are out there because they don't know how to run dental practices. When it becomes simply a financial transaction, and I think nothing against anybody who's ever sold out to a corporate DSO or things like that. Hey, you got your big money, awesome. But the challenge is there's some cracks. There's some chinks in the armor that I'm hearing amongst others in the industry who are saying the practices aren't worth that. And now they're starting to find out. And I think what could happen is then there's going to be these practices that are going to resurface, and they are starting to resurface already onto the marketplace of DSOs that are now starting to sell out of practices because they realized we overpaid.
I mean, well,
the PE money eventually says we're not making enough profit off of this, and they probably overpaid for those elements.
Well, it's a human industry, and our clients, they went into it because they wanted to help people and they wanted to have a relationship with people. And I guess I'm sure that has something to do with that.
Yeah, 100%. That's a trend. Yeah. Absolutely.
You got anything?
Yeah. I was just thinking, risk of going backwards and digging into another topic. Who are these in that instance where DSOs are selling to bigger PE groups necessarily, right, as a part of a growth strategy? But are they selling to independent doctors?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's
So
very
what's happening is because they have these practices and some of them are saying, oh, this practice doesn't work well. This isn't the right market. They are starting to. So I've seen on Facebook, I've heard it, out there where it's like the DSOs are starting to sell back practices and to have private practice owners come in and reacquire, some of those practices because like anything, like that is run strictly off of profit. And if there's not enough profit, then, they're going to unload some of those practices that are just not as profitable.
That's great. I know we've learned of a few closing down, in the Southeast Michigan area, just because there aren't many takers, independent doctors, who are gonna looking to purchase a 20 plus practice. But that's great. I'm sure
It's a challenge. I think there's a couple of different DSO kind of models that are out there, I think, or not really models, but more like digress on a topic. But like I think there are DSOs who know how to run dental practices. There are DSOs that it's a financial transaction. The difference is the ones that know how to run, that are like dental organizations that know how to run dental practices, they know how to have the systems. I mean, that's one thing that good DSOs have are good systems. Like dentists that come from there, no systems. The difference is the ones that are like, hey, we've got the money here. They come in and try to buy stuff. But then when there's challenges, actually, those are the ones who go, ooh, we don't really actually know how to run a dental practice. Those are the ones that they will have challenges because when, stuff hits the fan and there's challenges. And then if someone's not there to actually know how to run a dental practice, those are the ones that are going to start to stumble.
I appreciate that. Now that's fascinating. There's a lot of question marks as far as the next 3, 5, 7 years and so forth in the industry, and overall we're excited about being a part of it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, absolutely. I again can't predict what's going to happen 3 to 5 years from today, but like anything, our industry shifts. But I've been doing this for almost 2 decades now, going into 20 years myself in this industry. Have there been shifts? Yeah, but not seismic shifts. Just there are just going to be shifts, and still see the same number of dentist opening practices, the same number that are acquiring practices. So there's still a spot, 100% for private practice ownership.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time with us to
Thanks, guys.
And share a lot of information. You got a wealth of knowledge, and we're trying to absorb as much as we can. Before you leave, if you could leave us a question that you'd like us to ask another premium dental vendor in the future.
I would probably say let me think about that. I would probably say where do you think it's more of a construction in like where, what do we see in the future for costs? Where do we see a future for those kinds of elements? Because it's getting more and more expensive. And I think timeline is another challenge. One of the biggest things that we have right now is timeline, where it's not in our control. And permit timeline, material timeline, it's like we are at the mercy of the projects take longer, not because of us. They take longer because of all these other outside forces. How do we shrink that down?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we see that all the time, and it's mind-boggling and mind-numbing. All I can say is that it seems like almost every industry that we work with, everybody's had some ups and downs the past few years. Contractors, it seems like they've been riding high on the hog for a long time. They haven't had to sharpen their pencils for a long time, and maybe it's due. Awesome, man. Well, we appreciate
Thanks, guys.
the time, and we will be in touch. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Remy. Thanks, Nick.
Bye.
See you guys.